In the shadow of St. Peter's Basilica, as thousands gathered for the Pope's Angelus prayer, a boy in a wheelchair defied every medical prediction and rose to his feet. When gravity claimed its due and he began to fall, a Swiss guard faced an impossible choice: maintain centuries of protocol or save a child's dream. What happened next left pilgrims weeping and changed two lives forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across St. Peter's Square as Catherine wheeled her 10-year-old son Walter toward the colonnade. His eyes sparkled with anticipation, small hands gripping his wheelchair's armrests as he caught his first glimpse of the Swiss Guards, the Pope's elite protectors, known for their colorful Renaissance uniforms and unwavering discipline. "Mom, do you think they'll be as tall as they look in the pictures?" Walter's voice quivered with excitement, drawing gentle smiles from passing pilgrims. Catherine squeezed his shoulder softly as she navigated through the gathering crowd. "Even taller, sweetheart," she replied, her voice carrying warmth that masked years of hidden struggles. Walter sat up straighter in his wheelchair, unconsciously mimicking the perfect posture of Guard Matteo Rossi. The Swiss guard stood motionless in his blue, red, and yellow striped uniform, his halberd held with ceremonial precision. Even after the accident, even after everything changed, Walter's dream had remained constant. Someday, somehow, he would wear that uniform. "Mom," Walter said, determination mixing with hope in his voice, "I want to get closer, please." His eyes never left the guard's immaculate uniform, studying every detail as if committing it to memory. Catherine hesitated briefly, then nodded. Sometimes the best thing a mother could do was let go just a little bit. As Walter wheeled himself forward with practiced determination, a small group of pilgrims gathered nearby. An elderly nun touched Catherine's arm gently. "Your son," she said softly, "he seems to have such deep respect for the guards. It's rare to see in one so young." Catherine's eyes never left Walter as she spoke. "He's dreamed of becoming a Swiss guard since he was old enough to walk." Her voice caught on the last word. "Before the accident." Several pilgrims moved closer, drawn by the emotion in her voice. Catherine rarely spoke about that day, but something about this moment loosened the words she usually kept locked away. It was just an ordinary Sunday. Walter was playing in the park, showing his friends how Swiss guards march. He'd been practicing for weeks. She paused, drawing a deep breath. The driver was texting. Didn't see him until it was too late. A collective murmur of sympathy rose from the small crowd. "The doctors said it was a miracle. He survived it all. The spinal nerve damage was severe. They told us he would never walk again." The elderly nun squeezed Catherine's arm supportively. "And his father? Couldn't handle it. The responsibilities, the medical bills, the constant care Walter needed. One morning he just left. Said he needed a fresh start." The bitterness in her voice was overwhelmed by deeper strength. But Walter never lost his spirit. Even in the hospital, he would ask nurses to position his bed so he could practice his salutes. A young father in the crowd held his daughter closer, his own eyes glistening. Catherine continued, her voice strengthening with pride. "The other children at school tried to tease him at first, said he couldn't be a Swiss guard from a wheelchair. But Walter just smiled and told them that a true guard's strength comes from the heart, not the legs." Guard Matteo Rossi maintained his forward gaze, but his ears caught every word of Catherine's story. Each detail struck a chord deep within him, awakening memories he'd tried to suppress. His own son Marco would have been about Walter's age now. The thought came unbidden, as it always did during quieter moments on duty. Images flashed through his mind. A small boy's bedroom walls covered with pictures of Swiss guards, a child's voice begging, "Papa, just one more story about the Vatican." But Marco would never grow up to hear those stories. One rainy night, one missed bedtime due to guard duty, one tragic accident, and his world had shattered. His wife's last words still echoed. What kind of father chooses duty over his own son? She'd left the next day. Now, as he stood rigid in his ceremonial uniform, another young boy's voice pulled at his heart. "Excuse me, sir." Walter's voice was clear and strong, carrying respect he'd practiced countless times in front of his mirror. "I hope it's okay that I'm closer than the others. I want to learn everything about being a Swiss guard." Guard Rossi maintained his stance, but something shifted inside him. The boy's wheelchair was closer than protocol typically allowed, but there was nothing challenging in his presence, only earnestness that reminded him painfully of Marco. "I've been practicing," Walter continued confidentially. "Mom says I can't do the march, but I've got the head turns perfect. 70 degrees exactly, just like in the manual. Did you know it takes 3 hours to prepare your uniform each morning?" A slight breeze ruffled the plumes on Rossi's helmet. His peripheral vision caught Walter's hands gripping his armrests with the same determination a young guard might grip his halberd during inspection. "The doctors say I'll never walk again, that I should find a different dream." Walter paused, then added with quiet determination, "But they don't understand. Being a Swiss Guard isn't just about walking. It's about standing for something bigger than yourself." Guard Rossi felt moisture blur his vision momentarily. In all his years of service, nothing had threatened his composure like this boy's unwavering faith. "I know you can't talk to me," Walter continued, "and that's okay. That's part of what makes you special, doing your duty no matter what. But I wanted you to know that someday, somehow, I'll stand beside you, even if the doctors say it's impossible." Around them, more pilgrims had gathered, drawn by the unfolding drama. A group of Italian tourists whispered prayers, their faces etched with concern. An American family lowered their cameras, the father pulling his young son closer as they witnessed something beyond sightseeing. A cluster of elderly German pilgrims stood with clasped hands, tears already forming in their eyes. Even some gendarmeria officers watched from the outer perimeter, their usual vigilance softened by the extraordinary scene. A young Spanish mother lifted her toddler higher, whispering explanations in rapid Castilian. Several African priests in white cassocks moved closer, their faces reflecting deep empathy. Walter's voice grew quieter, meant only for the guard's ears. "My dad left because he said taking care of me was too hard, that some things are impossible to fix. But I think he just didn't understand about being strong. Not like you do, not like Mom does." A drop of rain fell, landing on Rossi's cheek and mixing with a tear he couldn't quite contain. "Sometimes at night when my legs hurt really bad, I think about standing here like you. Perfect posture, perfect control, perfect dignity. It helps me be brave." Walter paused, choosing his words carefully. "The doctors say it's just phantom sensations, that I shouldn't get my hopes up. But I think sometimes you have to believe in impossible things to make them possible." Walter planted his hands firmly on his wheelchair's armrest, his small fingers gripping the metal with determined strength. The crowd behind him had fallen silent, Catherine's story trailing off as she noticed her son's unusual posture. "Mom," Walter called out, his voice steady despite the trembling in his arms. "I need to try something. Please don't stop me." There was quiet authority in his voice that Catherine had never heard before, the voice of someone who had made a life-changing decision. "Walter, honey," Catherine's voice shook as she started forward. "Be careful. You know what the doctor said?" "I know, Mom," he interrupted gently, never taking his eyes off the guard. "But sometimes you have to believe in something bigger than what doctors say. Guard Rossi is going to watch over me. Nothing bad can happen when a Swiss guard is watching." The muscles in Walter's arms strained with effort as he began to push himself upward. Years of physical therapy had strengthened his upper body, but this was different. This wasn't exercise. This was a moment of truth. An elderly priest in the crowd began whispering the Ave Maria. A young mother pulled her children closer, tears already forming. Even the gendarmeria officers stepped forward slightly, their hands moving instinctively toward their radios before stopping, transfixed. Sweat beaded on Walter's forehead as he continued his struggle upward, his legs trembling, whether from effort or spasms, no one could tell. But his face showed no pain, only intense concentration. "The doctor said the nerve damage was permanent," Walter spoke through gritted teeth, rising millimeter by millimeter, "that the signals couldn't get through anymore. But they didn't know about Swiss Guard signals, did they?" A small sound escaped Catherine's throat, somewhere between sob and laugh. Her son's determination never ceased to amaze her. Walter's arm shook as he reached the halfway point between sitting and standing. His face had gone pale with exertion, but his eyes remained clear and focused. You know what they never understood? He managed between careful breaths. Standing isn't just about legs. It's about standing for something. A collective gasp went through the crowd as Walter's body continued to rise. The American tourists forgot their cameras. Italian pilgrims crossed themselves. Even Swiss guards from other positions had noticed the commotion, their eyes tracking toward their colleague and the extraordinary scene unfolding. In training, Swiss guards learned to stand for hours without moving, Walter continued, his voice growing stronger as his body rose higher. They stand through rain, through heat, through everything life throws at them. He was nearly upright now, his legs shaking visibly, but somehow supporting weight they hadn't held in years. The morning sun caught the tears streaming down his face, tears not of pain, but of pure determination. Because that's what guards do, Walter declared, his voice ringing with triumph as he achieved a fully upright position. They stand no matter what. They stand for something bigger than themselves. The silence in the square was absolute. Catherine's tears fell freely, her hands clasped over her heart. The elderly nun gripped her prayer beads. A Swiss guard at the far end of the colonnade had actually turned his head, a breach of protocol so rare that nearby pilgrims gasped. Walter stood there, trembling but upright, his chest heaving with effort but his face shining with inner light. For a moment, it didn't matter that his legs shook or that every muscle strained against gravity. He was standing, truly standing, before his hero. Then, slowly, deliberately, he began to lift his right foot. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible as he attempted what seemed beyond impossible, not just standing, but walking. His foot hovered inches above the ground, wavering as he fought for balance. It was at this precise moment that everything began to tilt. Walter's body, having achieved one miracle, couldn't quite manage another. As his balance failed and he began to fall forward, time seemed to slow down. Catherine's scream caught in her throat. The crowd surged forward uselessly, and guard Matteo Rossi had a choice to make. In that split second, as Walter began to fall, guard Rossi made the kind of decision that defines a life. Protocol, duty, and tradition all demanded he maintain his post. But something deeper, something that spoke of fathers and sons, of lost chances and found courage, moved through him like lightning. His ceremonial halberd clattered to the ancient stones as he lunged forward, catching Walter in strong arms before he could hit the ground. The sudden movement was so fluid, so precise, that it seemed more like a choreographed dance than a rescue. "I've got you, son," Rossi spoke for the first time, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you." Tears flowed freely down his face now, no longer held back by protocol or pretense. Walter, still trembling from exertion, looked up at the guard in wonder. "And you moved. You broke protocol for me." "Some things are more important than protocol," Rossi replied, his voice breaking. His arms tightened slightly around the boy, as if holding his own son one last time. "Some moments demand we choose between what's right and what's required." Catherine had reached them now, her hands fluttering anxiously over her son. "Walter, honey, are you all right? Are you hurt?" But her words trailed off as she saw the look passing between her son and the guard, a look of profound understanding that transcended the moment. "I stood," Walter said proudly, his face glowing despite his exhaustion. "I really stood. Did you see, Mom? Did you see me stand like a real guard?" Rossi adjusted his hold on Walter, supporting him more securely. "You did more than stand. You showed everyone here what true strength looks like." His voice caught as he added, "My son Marco would have been proud to stand beside someone like you." The words tumbled out then as if a dam had broken. "My son Marco," Rossi began, his voice barely above a whisper. "He would have been about your age now. Always asking about the guards. Always making me promise to tell him stories when I got home." His tears fell onto Walter's shoulder. "But there was this one night, a special ceremony, extra security needed. I chose duty over bedtime stories. Told myself there would be other nights." He paused, struggling with memories he'd buried. A drunk driver ran a red light on their way to get gelato. My wife, she His voice cracked. She said what kind of father chooses protocol over his own child. She was right. I failed him when he needed me most. Walter reached up and touched the guard's face gently. But you didn't fail me. You chose me over protocol. Rossi looked into the boy's eyes, seeing in them the forgiveness he'd never been able to give himself. You've shown me that being a guard, being a father, being a man, it's all about knowing when to stand firm and when to bend. Marco would have loved your courage. High above them, on the Apostolic Palace's balcony, Pope Francis had witnessed the entire scene. He'd been preparing for the Angelus prayer when the commotion below caught his attention. Now he stood in the shadow of the loggia, his weathered hands clasped in silent prayer. The Holy Father had seen many miracles in his years of service, but few as pure as this. A child's impossible faith answered, and a grieving father's heart healed through the courage to break protocol for love. With a gentle gesture visible to those who looked up, the Pope traced a small sign of the cross in the air. Not the formal apostolic blessing of ceremony, but the quiet benediction of a shepherd who had witnessed grace in action. Walter reached up and straightened Rossi's plumed helmet with careful precision. No guard should ever be ashamed of doing the right thing. That's what Mom always tells me. And you did the right thing just now. You chose to guard me when I needed it most. Rossi looked down at this remarkable boy in his arms, seeing in him both the son he'd lost and the strength he'd thought gone forever. His uniform was no longer perfectly pressed, his posture no longer ceremonial, but in that moment, he felt more like a true Swiss guard than ever before. Around them, the crowd had begun to disperse slowly, but their faces carried something new, not just the satisfaction of witnessing spectacle, but the quiet awe of those who had seen the miraculous emerge from the ordinary. The gendarmeria officers spoke softly into their radios, explaining to supervisors that protocol had been broken for reasons that transcended protocol itself. Now then, Rossi said, gathering himself slightly, shall we show your mother what a proper Swiss guard's walk looks like? I think you've earned your first lesson. Walter's face lit up with joy that seemed to illuminate the entire colonnade. Really? You'll teach me? Rossi nodded, carefully adjusting his hold and to provide better support. First rule of being a Swiss guard is knowing when to stand alone and when to accept support from your fellow guards. As Catherine watched through tears, Rossi helped Walter find his balance, one arm securely around the boy's waist. The guard's movements were precise yet tender, each adjustment made with the care of someone handling something infinitely precious. Back straight, Rossi instructed softly, his voice still thick with emotion. Shoulders back, chin up. That's it. A Swiss guard always leads with dignity. His voice trembled as he added, just like you've been doing all along, Marco mio. Just like my Marco would have done. With Rossi's support, Walter lifted his right foot again. This time there was no fall. The foot moved forward, hovered for a heartbeat, and planted itself firmly on the ancient stones. Mom! Walter called out, wonder filling his voice. Look, I'm really walking. The crowd around them had grown silent, watching as boy and guard took their first steps together. Each movement was deliberate, measured, not just a walk, but a ceremony of healing. Walter's legs trembled with the effort, but his face glowed with determination that seemed to light the entire colonnade. One more step, Rossi encouraged, his voice growing stronger. Guards don't rush. We move with purpose, with dignity. Each step matters. An elderly Italian woman in the crowd began weeping openly, clutching her rosary. The American father who had pulled his son close now whispered, Do you see that, buddy? That's what courage looks like. A young priest from the group of African clergy moved closer, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Even the normally stoic gendarmeria officers found themselves wiping their eyes. They had covered perhaps 10 steps when Walter looked up at his guide. Guard Rossi, he said between careful breaths. Does it get easier? The walking, I mean. Rossi considered this carefully as they continued their slow progress. In training, we learn that every step is both an ending and a beginning. The difficulty doesn't disappear, but you grow stronger. He squeezed Walter's shoulder gently. Your strength was already there, Gardino. You just needed someone to help you remember how to use it. Behind them, Catherine walked alongside the elderly nun who had first spoken to her. Both women's faces streamed with tears. not of sadness, but of pure joy mixed with overwhelming gratitude. 20 steps, Walter announced proudly as they neared the spot where Catherine waited. Did you count them, Mom? 20 real steps. The small crowd that had gathered began to applaud, not the scattered clapping of tourists, but the deep, sustained applause of people who had witnessed something sacred. The Italian tourists crossed themselves. The German pilgrims linked arms. Even the Spanish mother had set down her toddler, who clapped his tiny hands in mimicry of the adults around him. You know, Rossi said as they walked, being a Swiss Guard isn't just about standing still or marching in formation. It's about standing up for what's right, about helping others stand when they can't do it alone. You've understood that better than most guards I've trained. When they finally reached Catherine, she enveloped them both in a fierce embrace, her tears mingling with their own. Thank you, she whispered to Rossi, the words carrying the weight of years of solitary struggle. Thank you for giving him this moment. Rossi carefully helped Walter back into his wheelchair, but there was nothing of defeat in the movement. Instead, it felt like the end of one lesson and the promise of more to come. Same time next week? He asked, his official guard's voice returning but now carrying warmth that hadn't been there before. A proper guard needs regular training, after all. Walter's face lit up even brighter. Really? You mean it? At Rossi's nod, he straightened in his wheelchair and snapped off a perfect salute, one guard to another. Rossi returned the salute with formal precision, his eyes glistening. Until next week, then, Guard Walter. As the afternoon sun began its descent behind St. Peter's Dome, casting long shadows across the square where miracles still happen, two broken souls had found healing in the shadow of the world's most sacred places, where a boy's impossible dream had taught them all what it truly meant to stand tall, not in defiance of gravity, but in service to something greater than themselves. Above them, the Pope had returned to his private chapel, but his prayers that day carried special intention for a Swiss guard who chose love over protocol, and for a boy who proved that real strength is measured not in the steadiness of one's legs, but in the unwavering discipline of one's heart.